Hello, thanks for being with me here today to study the Enneads by Plotinus. We're just going to start at the beginning, the first tractate in the first Ennead. I'm using the McKenna translation. I would say that all the translations are pretty different. I could be wrong, but I believe the McKenna is the first one, but it wasn't a scholarly translation. It was like a hobbyist that translated it. But I think that it's the best. It's very poetic, and I think that the poetic aspects really help with as like descriptors compared to like the scholarly translations, which turn a spiritual metaphysical text into, I think, an overly logical and dry one, and it does lose some of its soul. So that's why I went with the McKenna, but I wouldn't say that I'm an expert or anything, you know. This is my first time really visiting the Enneads, and I would say that it's not a perfect translation by any means, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean, I would be really interested to hear what you think the best translation is, or what translation you go with and why, or any discussion on that, because I didn't look that deep into it. And then I think that it's worth mentioning that I'm coming at this from kind of more of an esoteric background, so I've studied Hermeticism quite a bit. There's huge parallels between Hermeticism and the Enneads, and I think that's because the integration of Thoth in ancient Greece, and then, you know, but what really brought me here wasn't Hermeticism. I was studying Christian theology, and I was like, wow, that's got a lot of parallels to Neoplatonism. And then I was looking kind of into a bit, like where those ideas originated from in Christian theology, and I found that that Plotinus really inspired Christian theology, and so I thought that was really interesting, and those are the aspects of Christian theology that I really liked, and so I just decided to look into Plotinus more. Then some of that seemed kind of like he's very oversimplified, very underrated, when he is, in my opinion, a huge backbone of Western culture and philosophy. And yeah, very misunderstood in my opinion. And so when I began reading the Enneads, I realized that there's a lot more to it than I even expected. And I figured it's going to take me a while to break this down and to work through it. And I'd love to share it with other people too. I might start streaming it, and then we can discuss it as I'm working through it. I think Plotinus said that's how he always intended it to be studied. But for now, I'm just going to start out by just reading it and sharing my notes, and I'd love to discuss it in the comments or for people to discuss in the comments as well. So, I also want to preface too that the first, I'd say 1, 2, 3, 4. I would say, yeah, the first 4 pages are Plotinus, doing the philosopher thing of kind of coming to a, what is that called? Like a teleological perspective, considering an end and then working your way back from that. So the big questions that, oh, sorry, my notes are, up with my notes. But the first 4 pages are him discussing like discursive reason, which is, I guess, what I just talked about, that theological view is how I would describe discursive reason. And so that's what he's doing here. And he's mostly just kind of talking about what constitutes the soul, how is the soul connected to the body, which, like, what intellectual faculties belong to the body and to the soul, which desiring faculties belong to the body and the soul. And I think, well, I might just blast through some of that a bit, and just get to his conclusion and then discuss the conclusion a bit. I might stop and mention some notes or some comments, but the heart of this first tractate is really at the end of it. And while the beginning might be kind of confusing or hard to go along with, because he's throwing out so many different terms and ideas, I promise that the end is really beautiful and it will all make sense. Alright. The first Ennead, first tractate, the animate and the man. Pleasure and distress, fear and courage, desire and aversion, where have these affections and experiences their seat? Clearly either in the soul alone, or in the soul as employing the body, or in some third entity deriving from both. And for this third entity, again, there are 2 possible modes. It might be either a blend or a distinct form due to the blending. And what applies to the affections applies also to whatsoever acts, physical or mental, spring from them. We have, therefore, to examine discursive reason and the ordinary mental action upon objects of sense, and inquire whether these have the one seat with the affections and experiences, or perhaps sometimes the one seat, sometimes another. We must consider also our acts of intellection, their mode and their seat. and this very examining principle which investigates and decides in these matters must be brought to light. Firstly, what is the seat of sense perception? This is the obvious beginning, since the affections and experiences either are sensations of some kind, or at least never occur apart from sensation. The first inquiry obliges us to consider at the outset the nature of the soul, that is, whether a distinction is to be made between soul and essential soul, between an individual soul and the soul kind in itself. If a distinction holds, then the soul in man is some sort of a composite, and at once we may agree that it is a recipient, and if only reason allows, that all the affections and experiences really have their seat in the soul. And with the affections, every state and mood, good and bad alike. But if soul and man and essential soul are one and the same, then the soul will be an ideal form, unreceptive of all those activities which it imparts to another kind, but possessing within itself that a native act of its own which reason manifests. I find too in Plotinus, act, I think generally often means reason. If this be so, then indeed we may think of the soul as an immortal. If the immortal, the imperishable, must be impassive, giving out something of itself, but itself taking nothing from, without, except for what it receives from the existence prior to itself, from which existence, and that they are the nobler, it cannot be sundered. So, the soul is imperishable, immortal. It gives, but it doesn't take anything. Now, what can bring fear to a nature thus unreceptive of all the outer? Fear demands feeling, nor is there place for courage. Courage implies the presence of danger, and such desires as are satisfied by the filling or voiding of the body must be proper to something very different from the soul, to that only which admits of replenishment and voidance. And how could the soul lend itself to any admixture? An essential is not mixed, or to the intrusion of anything alien. If it did, it would be seeking the destruction of its own nature. Pain must be equally far from it, and grief. How or for what could it grieve? Whatever possesses existence is supremely free, dwelling unchangeable within its own peculiar nature. And can any increase bring joy where nothing, not even anything good, can accrue? What such an existent is, it is unchangeably. Thus, assuredly, sense perception, discursive reasoning, and all our ordinary mentation are foreign to the soul, for sensation is a receiving, whether of an ideal form or of a bodily affection, and reasoning and all ordinary mental action deal with sensation. The question still remains to be examined in the matter of the intellections, whether these are to be assigned to the soul, and as to pure pleasure, pleasure apart from sense, whether this belongs to the soul in its solitary state. We may treat the soul as in the body, whether it be set above it or actually within it, since the association of the two constitutes the one thing called the living organism, the animate. Second. gotta get some of that kombucha in. Now from this relation, from the soul using the body as an instrument, it does not follow that the soul must share the body's experiences. A man does not himself feel all the experiences of the tools with which he is working. So he's saying that, or he's intellectualizing, exploring whether, if the soul is is part of the soul, if it's driving the soul. If the soul is driving the body, part of the body, then it's not going to feel what the body is feeling, just like if we were using a hammer, we're not going to feel what the hammer feels. It doesn't have nerve endings, but you know what I mean when you're hammering in a nail, for example. It may be objected that the soul must, however, have sense perception, since its use of its instrument must acquaint it with the external conditions, and such knowledge comes by way of sense. Thus, it will be argued, the eyes are the instrument of seeing, and seeing may bring distress to the soul. Hence, the soul may feel sorrow and pain and every other affection that belongs to the body, and from this again will spring desire, the soul seeking the mending of its instrument. But we ask, how possibly can these affections pass from body to soul? Body may communicate qualities or conditions to another body, but body to soul? Something happens to A, does that make it happen to B? As long as we have agent and instrument, there are two distinct entities. If the soul uses the body, it is separate from it. But apart from the philosophical separation, how does soul stand to body? Clearly there is a combination. And for this, several modes are possible. There might be a complete coalescence. The soul may be interwoven through the body, or it might be in ideal form, detached, or an ideal form in governing contact like a pilot. Or there might be part of the soul detached and another part in contact, the disjointed part being the agent or user, the conjoined part ranking with the instrument or thing used. In this last case, it will be the double task of philosophy to direct this lower soul towards the higher, the agent, and except in so far as the conjunction is absolutely necessary to sever the agent from the instrument, the body, so that it need not forever have its act upon or through this inferior. Let us consider then the hypothesis of a coalescence. Now, if there is a coalescence, the lower is ennobled, the nobler degraded, the body is raised in the scale of being as made participant in life. The soul, as associated with death and unreason, is brought lower. How can a lessening of the life quality produce an increase such as sense perception? No, the body has acquired life. It is the body that will acquire with life sensation and the affections coming by sensation. Desire then will belong to the body, as the objects of desire are to be enjoyed by the body, and fear too will belong to the body alone, for it is the body's doom to fail of its joys and to perish. Then again, we should have to examine how such a coalescence could be conceived. We might find it impossible. Perhaps all this is like announcing the coalescence of things utterly incongruous in kind, let us say of a line with whiteness. I couldn't tell you what let us say a line with whiteness means, but if you know, let me know. Next, for the suggestion that the soul is interwoven, through the body, such a relation would not give woof and warp community of sensation. The interwoven element might very well suffer no change. The permeating soul might remain entirely untouched by what affects the body, as light goes always free of all its floods, and all the more so since precisely we are asked to consider it as not confined to any one part but diffused throughout the entire frame. Under such an interweaving, then, the soul would not be subjected to the body's affections and experiences. Let us then suppose soul to be in body as ideal form and matter. Now, if the first possibility, the soul is in essence a self-existent, it can be present only as a separable form, and will therefore all the more decidedly be the using principle, and therefore unaffected. Suppose next the soul to be present like axe form on iron. Here, no doubt, the form is all important, but it is still not the one member, but the axe, the complement of iron in form that affects whatever is affected by the iron, thus modified. On this analogy, therefore, we are even more strictly compelled to assign all the experiences of the combination to the body. Yet the body is of a particular kind, a natural body, having organs and the potential recipient of life. Compare the passage in Aristotle, where we read that it is absurd to suppose that the soul weaves, equally absurd to think of it as desiring, grieving. All this is rather in the province of something which we may call the animate. Now, this animate might be merely the body as having life, it might be the complement of the soul and body, it might be a third and different entity formed from both. The soul, in turn, apart from the nature of the animate, must be either impassive, merely causing sense perception in its yoke fellow, or sympathetic, and if sympathetic, it may have identical experiences with its fellow, or merely correspondent experiences. Desire, for example, in the animate may be something quite distinct from the accompanying movement or state in the desiring faculty. The the live body, as we know it, we will consider later. Let us take first the complement of body and soul. How could suffering, for example, be seated in this complement? It may be suggested that some unwelcome state of the body produces a distress which reaches to a sensitive faculty, to a sense, which in turn merges into soul. But this account still leaves the origin of the sensation unexplained. Another suggestion might be that all is due to an opinion or judgment. Some evil seems to have befallen the man or his belongings, and this conviction sets up a state of trouble in the body and in the entire animate. But this account leaves still a question as to the source and seat of the judgment. Does it belong to the soul or to the complement? Besides, the judgment that evil is present does not involve the feeling of grief. The judgment might very well arise, and the grief by no means follow. One may think oneself slighted, and yet not be angry, and the appetite is not necessarily excited by the thought of a pleasure. We are thus no nearer than before to any warrant for assigning these affections to the complement. It is any explanation to say that desire is vested in a faculty of desire, and anger is the irascible faculty, and collectively that all tendency is seated in the appetitive faculty. Such a statement of the facts does not help towards making the affections common to the complement. they might still be seated either in the soul alone or in the body alone. On the one hand, if the appetite is to be stirred, as in the carnal passion, there must be a heating of the blood and bile, a well-defined state of the body. On the other hand, the impulse towards the good cannot be a joint affection, but like certain others too, it would belong necessarily to the soul alone. Reason then does not permit us to assign all the affections to the couplement. In the case of carnal desire, it will certainly be the man that desires, and yet, on the other hand, there must be desire in the desiring faculty as well. How can this be? Are we to suppose that when the man originates the desiring faculty moves to the order? How could the man have come to desire at all unless through a prior activity of the desiring faculty? Then it is the desiring faculty that takes the lead, yet how, unless the body be first in the appropriate condition? I take that to mean, because that is worded really weird, like for your body to like sense that it's hungry, and then your desiring faculty, so your brain desiring food from that, it has to like desire a desire, if that makes any sense. It may seem reasonable, it may seem reasonable to lay down as a law that when any powers are contained by a recipient, every action or state expressive of them must be the action or state of the recipient, they themselves remaining unaffected as merely furnishing efficiency. But if this were so, then since the animate is the recipient of the causing principle, i.e. the soul, which brings life to the couplement, this cause must itself remain unaffected. All the experiences and expressive activities of the life being vested in the recipient, the animate, but this would mean that life itself belongs not to the soul, but to the couplement, or at least the life of the couplement would not be the life of the soul. Sense perception would belong not to the sensitive faculty, but to the container of the faculty. But if sensation is a movement traversing the body and culminating in soul, how can the soul lack sensation? The very presence of this sensitive faculty must assure sensation to the soul. Once again, where is sense perception seated? In the couplement. Yet how can the couplement have sensation independently of action in the sensitive faculty, the soul left out of count and the soul faculty? The truth lies in the consideration that the couplement subsists by virtue of the soul's presence. This, however, is not to say that the soul gives itself as it is in itself to form either the couplement or the body. No, from the organized body and something else, let us say a light, which the soul gives forth from itself, it forms a distinct principle, the animate, and in this principle are vested sense perception and all the other experiences found to belong to the animate. But the we, how have we sense perception? By the fact that we are not separate from the animate, so constituted, even though certainly other and nobler elements go to make up the entire many-sided nature of man. Oops. At some point, I unplugged my microphone. Oh, hopefully the audio isn't bad. But the we, how have we sensed perception? By the fact that we are not separate from the animate, so constituted, even though certainly other and nobler elements go to make up the entire many-sided nature of man. The faculty of perception in the soul cannot act by the immediate grasping of sensible objects, but only by the discerning of impressions printed upon the animate by sensation. These impressions are already intelligibles, while the outer sensation is a mere phantom of the outer, of that in the soul, which is nearer to the authentic existence as being an impassive reading of ideal forms. And by means of these ideal forms, by which the soul wields single lordship over the animate, we have discursive reasoning, sense, knowledge, and intellection. From this moment we have peculiarity, the we. Before this there was only the ours, but at this stage stands the we, the authentic human principle, loftily presiding over the animate. There is no reason why the entire compound entity should not be described as the animate or living being mingled in a lower phase, but above that point the beginning of the veritable man, distinct from all that is kin to the lion, all that is of the order and of the multiple brute. And since the man so understood is essentially the associate of the reasoning soul, in our reasoning it is this we that reasons, and that the use and act of reason is a characteristic act of the soul. Okay, finally, this is when it really gets good. Let me check my notes, see if there's anything I should I guess let's see. Sorry. Association. Yeah, we went through all that. And that. Okay, I think that this is probably a good thing to know. The soul has a higher aspect that remains oriented towards the intellect and the divine, unaffected by the body, and a lower aspect that engages with the body to animate it and perform functions like perception and discursive reasoning. The lower part is not a separate entity, but a set of activities or powers through which the soul interacts with the material world. The higher part, the true soul, remains untouched by bodily influences and is capable of contemplation. The soul does not desire or grieve. All this is rather the province of something which we call the animate. How does the animate work? Is it merely the body as having life, a complement of the soul and body, or a third and different entity formed from both? How could suffering be seated in this complement? Since the animate is the recipient of the causing principle, the soul, which brings to life the complement, so that desiring faculty is, he used that to justify this causing principle of the animate. Since the animate is the recipient of the causing principle, the soul, which brings to life the complement, this cause must itself remain unaffected. All the experiences and expressive activities of the life being vested in the recipient, the animate, life itself belongs not to the soul but to the complement, or at least the life of the complement would not be life of the soul. Sense perception would belong not to the sensitive faculty, but to the container of the faculty. Life and sensory perception belongs to the complement. And then it looks like those were my notes as I was going along. Wrote a lot about this. Complement refers to the composite or union of the soul and body forming a single entity that functions as a living being. It emphasizes the conjunction or partnership between the soul and body, where they are brought together to create the living organism. The term suggests a functional unity, but Plotinus stresses that the soul remains distinct from the body, not merged or interwoven with it. The complement is the temporary combination that enables life, sensation, and discursive reasoning in the material world. In some translations, complement is used to describe the soul-body composite as a kind of partnership, highlighting the soul's role as the active governing principle and the body as its passive instrument. And then, yeah, I took a lot of notes on the complement and animate because it was confusing for me to differentiate the two. The animate refers to the living organism itself, the result of the soul animating the body. The term derives from the Latin anima, or soul, emphasizing the soul's role in giving life and activity to the body. The animate is the living being, for example, a human or animal as a whole, where the soul's presence makes the body a living, functioning entity capable of perception, movement, and thought. Plotinus uses animate to denote the soul-body composite as a unified entity during life, but he underscores that the soul is the true source of life, not the body. All right. Lost my page. Alright, these are my favorite pages of this tractate. I don't know if I read this part, so I'm just going to reread it if I already did. No, I probably already read it. Sorry. And towards the intellectual principle, what is our relation? By this I mean not that faculty in the soul, which is one of the emanations from the intellectual principle, but the intellectual principle itself, the divine mind. This also we possess as the summit of our being, and we have it either as a common to all or as our own immediate possession, or again, we may possess it in both degrees that it is common, since it is indivisible, one, everywhere and always, its entire self, and severally in that each personality possesses it entire in the first soul, i.e. in the intellectual as distinguished from the lower phase of the soul. Hence we possess the ideal forms also after two modes, and the soul as it were unrolled and separate, and in the intellectual principle concentrated one. And how do we possess divinity? In that the divinity is poised upon the intellectual principle and authentic existence, and we come third in order after these two. For the we is constituted by a union of the supreme, the undivided soul. We read in that soul, which is divided among living beings. For no, we inevitably think of the soul through one and undivided in the all, as being present to bodies in division, in so far as bodies are animates. The soul has given itself to each of the separate material masses, or rather, it appears to be present in the bodies by the fact that it shines into them. It makes them living beings, not by merging into the body, but by giving forth, without any change in itself, images or likenesses of itself, like one face caught by many mirrors. The first of these images is the faculty of sense perception, seated in the couplement, and from this downwards all the successive images are to be recognized as phases of the soul in lessening succession from one another until the series ends in the faculties of generation and growth, and of all production of offspring. Offspring, efficient in its turn, in contradistinction to the engendering soul, which has no direct action within matter, but produces by mere inclination towards what it fashions. That soul, then, in us, will in its nature stand apart from all that can cause any of the evils which man does or suffers. For all such evil, as we have seen, belongs only to the animate, the couplement. But there is a difficulty in understanding how the soul can go guiltless if our meditation and reasoning are vested in it, for all this lower kind of knowledge is delusion, and is the cause of much of what is evil. When we have done evil, it is because we have been worsted by our baser side. For a man is many by desire or rage or some evil image, the misnamed reasoning that takes up with the false, and reality fancy has not stayed for the judgment of the reasoning principle. We have acted at the call of the less worthy, just as in matters of the sense spheres. We sometimes see falsely because we credit only the lower perception, that of the couplement, without applying the tests of the reasoning faculty. So evil is a result of giving into the baser side of the body-soul couplement without applying tests of the reasoning faculty. The intellectual principle either apprehends its object or does not. Error is impossible. The same, we must admit, applies to ourselves. Either we do or we do not put ourselves in touch with what is object to the intellectual principle, or more strictly, with the intellectual realm within ourselves, for it is possible at once to possess and not use. I forgot to mention the soul that he, a few paragraphs back, he was talking about how do we possess divinity, and I didn't summarize that, but I thought it was really beautiful, and I want to make sure that I do. He explains that the soul is fundamentally one, yet it is also present everywhere and mirrored within the material world. The soul is an indivisible unity, each individual soul being a reflection or part of this universal soul. The soul being made up of a higher and lower part, constituting a soul composite, bridging the gap between the material and universal soul. All right, back to evil, and can the soul feel guilt? Is the soul guilty ever? The intellectual principle either apprehends its object or does not. Error is impossible. The same, we must admit, applies to ourselves. Either we do or we do not put ourselves in touch with what is object to the intellectual principle, or more strictly, with the intellectual realm within ourselves, for it is possible at once to possess and not to use. I think what that's saying, put ourselves in touch with what is object to the intellectual principle, not object as an object, but like objective, what is objective. Thus we have marked off what belongs to the complement from what stands by itself. The one group has the character of body and never exists apart from the body, while all that has no need of body for its manifestation belongs to peculiarity to the soul, and the understanding as passing judgment upon sense impressions is at the point of the vision of ideal forms, seeing them as it were with an answering sensation, i.e., with consciousness. This last is at any rate true of the understanding and the veritable soul, for understanding the true is the act of intellections. In many of its manifestations, it is the assimilation and reconciliation of the outer to the inner. Thus, in spite of all, the soul is at peace as to itself and within itself. All the changes and all the turmoil we experience are the issue of what is subjoined to the soul, and are, as we have said, the states and experiences of this elusive complement. It will be objected that if the soul constitutes the we, the personality, and we are subject to these states, then the soul must be subject to them, and similarly that what we do must be done by the soul. But it has been observed that the complement too, especially before our emancipation, is a member of this total we, and in fact, what the body experiences, we say we experience. This we then covers two distinct notions. Sometimes it includes the brute part, sometimes it transcends the brute. Brute means body touched to life. The true man is the other, going pure of the body, natively endowed with the virtues which belong to the intellectual activity. Virtues whose seat is the separate soul, the soul which, even in its dwelling here, may be kept apart. The soul constitutes the human being, for when it has wholly withdrawn, that other soul which is a radiation or emanation from it withdraws also after it. Those virtues, on the other hand, which spring not from contemplative wisdom, but from custom or practical discipline, belong to the complement. To the complement, too, belong the vices. They are its repugnances, desires, sympathies. In friendship, this emotion belongs sometimes to the lower part, sometimes to the interior man. So they're talking about virtues. Virtues belong to the intellectual activity. Man becomes human rather than brute by incorporating intellectual activity into the body-soul complement. Virtues that stem from customs or practical discipline rather than contemplative wisdom belong to the complement alone. So it's kind of funny. It's like you're not a human if you don't have virtues. According to Plotinus, you are a brute or an animal, which he kind of explains in these next few paragraphs. In childhood, the main activity is in the complement, and there is but little irradiation from the higher principles of our being. But when these higher principles act but feebly or rarely upon us, their action is directed towards the supreme. They work upon us only when they stand at the midpoint. But does not the we include that phase of our being which stands above the midpoint? It does, but on condition that we lay a hold of it. Our entire nature is not ours at all times, but only as we direct the midpoint upwards or downwards, or lead some particular phase of our nature from potentiality or native character into act. And the animals, in what way or degree do they possess the animate? If there be in them, as the opinion goes, human souls that have sinned, then the animating principle in its separable phase does not enter directly into the brute. It is there, but not there to them. They are aware only of the image of the soul, only of the lower soul, and of that only by being aware of the body organized and determined by that image. If there be no human soul in them, the animate is constituted for them by a radiation from the all-soul. So I like this because he's saying our nature is only ours when we take hold of a phase of our nature from potentiality or native character at our current understanding and direct it upwards or downwards. Like, you know, you start out, or you grow wherever you currently are, like maturity wise, or certain personality traits that you have, you know, uh, those are really only yours if you take ownership of them and you direct them and you choose to engage in vices and lower yourself, or if you choose to work on self-development and raise yourself, or I mean, you could go deeper to that even, but and Plotinus certainly does. So I guess that we'll go deeper when he does, shall we? But if soul is sinless, how come the expiations? Here surely is a contradiction. On the one side, the soul is above all guilt. On the other, we hear of its sin, its purification, its expiation. It is doomed to the lower world. It passes from body to body. We may take either view at will. They are easily reconciled. When we tell of the sinless soul, we make soul and essential soul one and the same. It is the simplest, unbroken unity. By the soul subject to sin, we indicate a groupment. We include that phase of the soul which knows all the states and passions. The soul in this sense is compound, all-inclusive. It falls under the conditions of the entire living experience. This compound, it is that sins. It is this and not the other that pays penalty. It is in this sense that we read of the soul. We saw it as those others saw the sea god Glaucos. And reading on, if we mean to discern the nature of the soul, we must strip it free of all that has gathered about it. Must see into the philosophy of it, examine with what existences it has touched, and by kinship to what existences it is what it is. Thus, the life and activities of the soul are not those of the expiator. The retreat and sundering then must not be from this body only, but from every alien accruement. Such accruement takes place at birth, or rather birth is the coming into being of that lower phase of the soul. For the meaning of birth has been indicated elsewhere. It is brought about by a descent of the soul, something being given off by the soul and coming down in declension. Then the soul has let this image fall, and this declension, is it not certainly sin? If the declension is no more than the illuminating of an object beneath, it constitutes no sin. The shadow is to be attributed not to the luminary, but to the object illuminated. If the object were not there, the light could cause no shadow. And the soul is said to go down to decline only in that the object it illuminates lives by its life, and it lets the image fall only if there be nothing near to take it up, and it lets it fall, not as a thing cut off, but as a thing that ceases to be. The image has no further being when the whole soul is looking toward the supreme. The poet, too, in the story of Hercules, seems to give this image separate existence. He puts the shade of Hercules in the lower world, and Hercules himself among the gods, treating the hero as existing in the two realms at once. He gives us a twofold Hercules. It is not difficult to explain this distinction. Hercules was a hero of practical virtue. By his noble serviceableness, he was worthy to be a god. On the other hand, his merit was action and not the contemplation which would place him unreservedly in the higher realm. Therefore, while he has place above, something of him remains below. And the principle that reasons out of these matters is it we or the soul? We, but by the soul. But how by the soul? Does this mean that we reason by the fact of possessing soul? No, by the fact of being soul. Its act subsists without movement, or any movement that can be ascribed to it must be utterly distinct from all corporeal movement and be simply the soul's own life. And intellection in us is twofold, since the soul is intellective and intellection is the highest phase of life. We have intellection both by the characteristic act of our soul and by the act of the intellectual principle upon us. For this intellectual principle is part of us no less than the soul, and towards it we are ever rising. And that's the end of the first tractate. And then let's see. So the way he kind of closes it out, he says, the soul is like a light shining down as an emanation from the one. I don't think he's really gone into the one too much yet, but I guess we could say from the universal soul for now. It is sinless as you emanate from the one or the universal soul, and the universal soul is an emanation from the one, but again, we haven't talked about the one, so imperfections occur as you emanate away from these higher divine layers, and shadows cast by the soul illuminating an object. These are not they're saying that the soul is like a light shining on an object and it animates it, but because it's shining, it creates a shadow, kind of like an imperfection, and that this isn't the fault of the soul, because if the object weren't there, the light would cause no shadow. And then the next tractate is about virtues, and I really love that one, so I'm really looking forward to it. If you listen to all of this, then thanks. Would love to hear your thoughts. This is my first time ever doing a video or trying to teach something like this, and I'm also learning myself, so yeah, I want this to be like a joint learning experience. And so if you have any helpful insights or anything that you want to mention or discuss in the comments, please do so. Or even if you have any constructive criticisms or anything like that. But yep, thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one on virtues.